Hi, welcome to week 5 of the Wellbeing series. My name's Ione Hurrell and I'm the founder of the Thinking Academy. I work one-to-one with senior leaders in schools, providing executive coaching and also provide coaching training so people can develop a coaching leadership style. I developed this wellbeing series really to support people with their emotional health, particularly at this time of challenge through the current pandemic. So far in the wellbeing series, we've looked at change, the challenge of the change curve. We've looked at the neuroscience of thinking. We've looked at emotional literacy, and we've also looked at the 5 ways to well-being. And today, I really want to look at overwhelm. It's probably come at quite a good time because a lot of schools are returning to opening up and a lot of businesses are opening, and there is a sense of overwhelm and stress that comes with that. So this will be hopefully a useful vlog today to give you a few tips and tools about how to manage overwhelm. But first I really want to talk about what overwhelm is. And it really is that feeling of when everything gets a bit too much. So when you've got a lot going on at work and your workload's increased, but also you've got the pressures of general home life, of looking after family members and children and organising the MOT and managing the home. And all of that can lead to a sense of being unable to manage everything and a feeling of pressure that goes with that. And that's the feeling of overwhelm. It can feel very heavy, it can feel very pressured, very stressed, and sometimes impossible to do anything. You can feel quite trapped with a sense of overwhelm and have that feeling that everything's a bit too daunting to manage. So I want to share with you some tips and tools. Now, I've learnt these throughout the different stages of my life, and I've also learnt some of these from some colleagues that I've been coaching, and we've worked through some ideas together. So these are probably the most successful tools and ideas that we've used, and there are 5 of them I'm going to run through with you today. And what I want you to do is just listen and pick out those ones that you think might be most useful to you when you're feeling stressed and overwhelmed. So let's start with number 1. Number 1 is, believe it or not, stop. Stop and pause. It may seem a bit counterproductive when I say that, because actually when we're overwhelmed and we've got lots to do, we just want to work quicker and get things done. But the problem is, our brains are not cut out for that rate of work. It's a bit like our brains running a marathon. We're just doing too much all the time. And if your body runs a marathon, you well know that you will get an injury. And it's the same with your brain. If you're running at full pelt the whole time with overwhelm and stress, eventually your brain will have enough and it won't be able to think straight. So there's a real importance here about taking a break, stopping and pausing. It's really, really important. People that work too hard all the time with their brains get stressed and end up being really poorly. So the importance of giving your brain a break, a proper break, is really vital. And the good thing about giving your brain a break is actually when we give our brains a little break, sometimes we can step away from the emotional thinking, the stressful thinking, and engage with our logic brain. I talked a bit about that in week 2, so if you want to refer back to that, it would be really useful. But being able to think more logically, because when we step back away from our emotional brain of feeling stressed, we can engage with a much more practical part of our brain. The prefrontal cortex, which can make decisions and deal with facts, and that's really, really useful when we're feeling stressed, to be able to see what's really happening. And actually that break is hugely important for us to be able to think straight, to be able to make choices. So I don't want you to see idleness as a bit of an indulgence. I want you to see it as a bit of a necessity. So taking a break should look like a good 15-20 minute gap where you are getting away from the work that you're in front of. Whether that be going outside and walking in nature, which can really clear your brain, or whether it's just sitting still, away from your computer or away from the piece of work and just giving yourself time to think. The beauty of giving yourself time to think and stepping away from work is sometimes you come up with some really valuable insights. You know how often you get those valuable insights when you're taking a shower, or when you're driving your car, or when you're walking somewhere, or in the middle of the night? It's because you're allowing your brain to switch off. So make sure that you stop, pause, allow that switch off so you can engage with some logic thinking and some really valuable insights to help you. Number 2. Well, this is one of my favourites, and one of the things I can sometimes have some difficulty with, but with practice it's really helped me. And that is, when we're overwhelmed, it's because we're doing too many things at once. We may think we are brilliant at multitasking. I think women think particularly we're good at multitasking, but actually the neuroscience shows that our brains are awful at multitasking. They find it incredibly difficult to switch from one thing to another. And by doing too many things at once, it increases our stress levels and can lead us feeling overwhelmed. And there's lots of research coming out of American universities at the moment that shows the damage that multitasking does when you flip from one thing to another. People who multitask actually have a lower brain density in their emotional and cognitive parts of their brain. So it actually doesn't help them to manage their emotions or cognitions. In fact, it makes it steadily worse. It also reduces working memory, which means it's harder for us to learn. And if we do it long enough, we actually become worse at identifying irrelevant things. So we see all things as important. So actually it increases our sense of overwhelm because we see everything as a priority. So if multitasking is not good for us, what do? Well, we do the inverse, which is we do one thing at a time. You pick one thing to concentrate on at a time and you focus on that. And although that sounds incredibly easy, it can be incredibly hard. There are so many distractions that are around us all the time. You know, the tabs opening, the phone bleeping, people knocking on our doors, that it can be incredibly hard to find time to focus on one thing. But even if you just carve out time to focus on one thing and make sure you close all the tabs on your browser, you turn the notifications off your phone so you are less distracted, that can really support focusing on one task at a time. The other thing that can really help is making sure that those big tasks are broken down into small, manageable chunks, and that you're realistic with the time that you give yourself to do those tasks. If you know you've got half an hour before a meeting and you're looking at, I've got to get that policy done, maybe just say to yourself, I'm just going to get section 1 of that policy written. That's going to be all I'm going to focus on right now, and remove everything else. This can actually increase your cognitive ability to manage, and actually focusing on one thing at a time increases your level of creativity, which is what you need to tap into and can really help you manage overwhelm. Number 3. Now, I'll be really honest with you, this is one of the things that crops up the most for people, and throughout my life it's been the thing that I've found most challenging to do to manage my sense of overwhelm, probably most when I was a senior leader and a head teacher, and that is asking for help when we're feeling overwhelmed and being able to say no. And I'm going to start with asking for help. When we think about asking for help, and when I talk with my clients about asking for help, and when I do some training on asking for help, it comes out as, well, I don't want to ask for help because it seems like a weakness. It seems like I'm failing, that I can't do the task. But actually, I believe it to be the opposite. I see it as a complete strength. And if you think about somebody else asking for help and what you think of them, you often think somebody that comes to ask for yourself is self-assured and self-confident and self-aware enough to know that they need to ask for reinforcements. So we need to apply that mindset and thinking to ourselves to know that actually asking for help is hugely beneficial, not only for us in enabling us to manage doing so many things at once, but actually in terms of creating more resources. I definitely don't have all the answers, and I was daft to think I ever did. So being able to ask for help and ask for support, you ask for a greater resource to be able to support you with a project, which often leads to a better outcome for that project. So do feel you can ask for help. In fact, it shows a much bigger strength in being able to do that. And people value their opinions being asked and their support. They actually enjoy being asked for help, which was quite a novelty to me, but it made a huge difference, and I'm much more able to ask readily for help now. And that has definitely reduced my level of feeling stressed and being overwhelmed. And the next bit I want to talk to you about is the sort of flip side of that, and it's being able to say no when things come in. If we say yes all the time, we're basically allowing somebody else to direct our time and direct our lives and our choices for us. So we need to be able to say no much more readily. The thing is with the word no is it can seem a little bit harsh and a little bit difficult to say to people, and we can feel like we might be letting people down. So there's a few things we can learn about saying no. If you're somebody that always says yes, one thing you could do is just try saying no in like safe spaces where you can get more confident with using the word no. So one thing you can do is, when somebody offers you a biscuit, just try that, no. Or somebody offers you a cup of tea, no. Just small little asks and practice using the word no. The other thing you can do, and the thing that I'm most comfortable doing, is change the way you say no. And find a stock phrase that really, really works for you. There are lots on the internet if you want to find a few ideas and play around them. But it's just finding a way that you feel comfortable with of being able to say no if somebody asks you for something. There are times, obviously, when you need to say yes, but there are times quite often that you need to say no, but you're caught in the moment. So there are two phrases that I use that I find quite useful, and that is if somebody catches me on the hop, particularly when I'm busy doing something and saying, can you do this? My default would probably be yes. But what I do now is I put a bit of a pause in, say, oh, that's really interesting. I haven't really got time to think about that. Can I get back to you? And that just puts a pause for me to be able to think whether I need to say yes to that or whether I need to say no. The other thing I can do is when I want to say no is I tend to say something like, oh, thank you for thinking of me like that. Do you know, I'd love to support you on that project right now. I just don't really have the capacity. I'm really sorry. Is there anyone else that could help you? And then I've left it with them and I've managed to say no without it sounding too harsh. And people normally go away very happy with that response. Warren Buffett always says that actually the most successful people say no far more than they say yes. In fact, they say no to almost everything. So it really helps reduce your stress and reduce your overwhelm because you're not taking on too much, and if you have got more on your plate, you're able to ask for help. So it's something that can be quite tricky, but can make a huge difference to being that feeling of stress and that feeling of overwhelm. Number 4 I want to talk to you about, and this is one I use regularly with all my clients, is the challenge of expectations and being a bit kinder to ourselves. I often use a little graph which I'm going to show you in a moment, but I want to talk about this in terms of an example. So when we're feeling overwhelmed and stressed, it's often because we feel the pressure of everything we've got to do. So we've probably got that endless to-do list in front of us that just goes on for maybe pages, or is in several books, or is in post-its all over your desk, but it's huge. So I'm going to show you this little graph, and I'm going to make you think about that to-do list in terms of this graph. This is a graph I share, which is success over time, but it's our expectations, and our expectations are often really high. I often hear phrases like, yeah, but I'm a bit of a perfectionist. Yes, but I want everything to be perfect, or something to this degree. And I want to say to you right now, there's no such thing as perfect. It's taken me a long time to discover that, and it's taken a lot of toil and stress, but I've recognised there is no such thing as perfect. So I've let go of perfectionism and understand that good enough's actually okay. And doing your best is about the best you can do. So in terms of expectation, if our expectations are high and our reality is much lower than that, the gap in between that is what causes us stress, pressure, and overwhelm. And so let's take that to-do list. If our expectations are to get everything done on that list, and the reality is we've only got an hour during our day, it's just not going to happen. And that's going to increase our levels of anxiety and our feeling of failure. So there are 3 really simple things we can do. We can lower our expectations. We can raise our reality. So we're narrowing that gap. Or third, we can do a bit of both. But any of those is going to help reduce overwhelm and stress. So let's take it in terms of the great big to-do list. Let's reduce our expectations. And people think that lowering our expectations is a really bad thing. Well, no, it's not. It's putting it more in line with being realistic, and that is good. So in terms of your great to-do list, if you were to sit there with your to-do list now, and I've done this with many people, and we've gone through it item by item, and I ask the questions, okay, so what on that to-do list needs completing by 4 o'clock today? And as you go through, you go, well, not that one, not that one, not that one. Oh my goodness, not that one, not that one. And actually, if you go through that list and really think about it, there might be 1, maybe 2 things that have to be done by 4 o'clock that day, but the vast majority don't. And actually, I've sat with people before and they've gone, well, actually nothing. So reducing that level of expectations that we need to do all those things, and it comes back to that element of focusing on one thing and just focusing on one thing that has to be done by the end of that day, can make us feel like we're achieving, we're reducing our level of expectation, but we're getting stuff done, and it matches reality. If you want to raise reality, it might be looking at your working day and saying, where is my time? Where can I increase the time in order to do these things? And sometimes that might be blocking out chunks of your diary, going and working in a different space in school where you're not disturbed, or even where it's possible, maybe working from home and having some dedicated headship time, dedicated leadership time away from the office, where you can actually find time to do some of these big chunks. Sometimes it's about making the reality of this, actually, I've got a big project, it needs doing. I'm going to have to spend a little bit of time at my weekend doing it. So from 9 to 12 on the Saturday morning, I'm just going to crunch through this so that I've got the rest of the weekend with my family. But it is raising the reality in order to meet the expectations. And in doing that, amazingly, we reduce the feeling of stress and pressure. And you can make you feel much, much better. So have a look at working your to-do list in terms of that expectation and in terms of that level of reality. And you can apply that graph to almost everything, to working with difficult colleagues, to working, under stress, to working with your family and expectations of cleaning and organising around the house. You either reduce your expectations or raise your reality a bit, or do a bit of both. The last one I want to talk to you about today, number 5, on the ways of managing overwhelm, is Stephen Covey's Circle of Concern, which is taken from his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, which he wrote in 1989. And it's still as relevant today as it was back then. And I use it really frequently with my clients. And it really helps manage that feeling of overwhelm so you feel much more in control. So all you do is you start off with a large circle on a sheet of paper, and this is your circle of concern. And in that circle, you can write all the things that are concerning you at that particular point of time. So it might be things like, government directives, your health, workload, children, difficult colleagues, the weather, finances. It can be anything that's causing you upset. It might be things, news items that are going on abroad that are causing you distress, and all those things that are making you feel overwhelmed because you're spending so much time concerning yourself and worrying yourself about those things. So you jot those all down. And then the second phase of using this model is in the center circle, you draw a smaller circle, and this is your circle of control. And this is all the things that you can do. And so these are your words, your choices, your actions, your behaviours, all of these elements go into that middle box. And what we do is we take every concern and have a look at it and see what we can actually control about it. And in terms of some things, we just have to let them go. They'll always be our concern, but there's nothing we can do about them. Let's take government directives, for example. There's not a lot we can do about them, so we just need to let them go. But there are some things that we can do bits about. Let's take our health, for example. Say we're feeling tired all the time, and that's really the crux of the thing we're worried about. We're exhausted all the time. Well, there's things we can do about that. It's about maybe getting some better sleep patterns. So in our circle of control, we can put things like, I'm going to aim to get to bed before 10 o'clock in the evening, or I'm going to make sure that I lie in on a Saturday, or whatever it is that means you're getting more sleep, that reduces your tiredness. But this is what you can do about it. So we're making real choices in our circle of control and creating real actions for doing things instead of letting everything feel overwhelming and concerning. If you take your difficult colleague, quite often when we look at this, well, we can't change how difficult they are or how difficult they make us feel, but we can change our response to them and our actions and behaviours. And more often than not, the thing we can do with a difficult colleague is have a conversation. And sometimes it might be what we perceive to be a difficult conversation, but it's a conversation that needs to happen anyway. And so if we put that in our circle of control and we use that as an action, we're doing something about it. And this is the power of this model, because we create some really clear, specific actions that we can do that make us feel much more in control. So instead of staying in that wider circle of stress and anxiety, of the circle of concern, we focus on the circle of control. And as soon as we start focusing our energy into that circle of control, we influence it. And there's a lovely little diagram here that just shows that when you work in your circle of control, when you focus all your energy on what you can do and what you can affect, then actually the influence that you create in the world around you grows, and you'll notice that the circle of concern diminishes. So you feel much more in control and much more capable, and reduce those levels of stress and the feeling of overwhelm. So it's a really good tool to use at specific points when you've got a lot on. I probably use it maybe once or twice a year when I'm doing big projects and there's a lot on. I'll put something in there, and then I'll have a really clear identification of the actions I need to take in the next week, month, that will really, really support me. So those are the 5 sort of strategies really that you can use. And I suppose my top tips are just pick one of those strategies that you feel would help you with your stress levels, would help you with your feeling of overwhelm, and then practice it. So after you've practiced it, notice how it makes you feel, and if it feels good, then it's obviously working, and keep using those tools. But if it for whatever reason doesn't work, try one of the other strategies. But always just be kind to yourself, because it is a time when you've got a lot on. So you just need to be kind to yourself and treat yourself as you would do your best friend. And I'll talk a little bit about that next week when I talk about self-compassion and developing self-compassion for yourself. In the meantime though, if you want to connect with me at all, you can do that via Twitter. My handle is @thinkingacademy, or you can email me, which is leonie@thethinkingacademy.co.uk. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these videos, and if you'd like anything else that can potentially support you and your well-being. That's it for now, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye.